In this video, I'm going to explain the main techniques that psychics use in order to convince their clients that they, the psychic, have psychic powers. The techniques that psychics use, for the most part, come under the umbrella of cold reading. Cold reading means reading a person, that is to say, getting information from them, but doing it cold. That is, you're going in cold. The psychic doesn't have any previous knowledge of the client. The alternative to this is hot reading, which means that the psychic has researched the client beforehand and gives the client the information that they found as if they were psychically deducing this information rather than simply researching it. Now, hot reading is obviously always fraudulent. Cold reading can be fraudulent, or it can be a matter of the psychic fooling themselves and genuinely believing that they do have psychic powers. I'm not sure that it's clear how many psychics are frauds and how many are self-deceiving, but it doesn't really matter. The techniques are broadly the same. Firstly, setting the stage. Psychics will generally try to create a physical environment that gives an impression of authority and of the occult. To get an air of authority, they might have bookcases with reference books, charts, the sorts of things that you would associate with academia. To give the impression of the occult, they might use candles, low lighting, incense, and so on. A convincing psychic will speak softly and calmly, maintain eye contact, keep their head tilted to one side when listening, face the subject or face the client, and not cross their arms or their legs, all of which give the impression that the psychic is really listening to the client. There are many ways of describing personality which sound specific, but which many or even most people will believe apply to them in particular. This is sometimes called the Barnum effect, or statements of this type are sometimes called Barnum statements, after the circus owner P.T. Barnum, who advertised a little something for everybody. Some Barnum statements flatter the client, but the flattery is not so obvious that it appears insincere and therefore puts the client on their guard. An example might be, "You are wise in the ways of the world, a wisdom gained through hard experience rather than book learning." Another technique is to describe a person behaving in one way at some time and in the opposite way at other times. So, for example, a psychic might say, "You are confident in your talents, yet you still harbour some insecurities." Or, "You can be a very considerate person, but there are times, if you're honest, when you recognise a selfish streak in yourself. You strike a healthy balance between head and heart." The last one, you'll notice, is also subtle flattery. Similarly, there are objects which seem very specific, but which most people will recognise from at least one point in their life. Examples include a box of old photographs, most not in albums, a drawer that is stuck or doesn't slide properly, a white car, or keys but you don't remember what they open. There are incidents which are similar: a scar on the knee, the number 2 in an address, a childhood accident involving water. There are other statements which are likely to be true for particular people of a particular age, gender, or social group, all of which, of course, you can generally get just by looking at the person. For example, an older person probably has parents who have died. A psychic might say that your father died due to problems in his chest or abdomen, which might seem very specific, but that covers heart disease, covers most cancers, and it covers a lot of other conditions. Clients of psychics are generally interested in one of only a few subjects: love, health, money, career, education, travel. Psychics will tend to raise these subjects, and even that might be seen as evidence of psychic ability. Well, how did they know that I was interested in my love life when I didn't say anything about that? There are also interests that are typical of people of particular ages. So young adults are often interested in establishing their own beliefs and their independence from their parents. People in their 30s are often chafing at restrictions in their lives based on choices they made in their 20s. There are ways of asking for information which don't sound like the psychic is asking, but merely confirming what they already know. So a psychic might say, you can connect with this, can't you? Or this is significant to you, isn't it? Or can you see why this might be the impression I'm getting? Those are, of course, requests for information, and so the client generally will answer, but it doesn't sound like the psychic is stymied. It sounds like they know. Psychics will often phrase questions negatively. For example, you're not married, are you? Rather than, are you married? If the psychic gets the tone right, it can be ambiguous whether the person asking the question expects the answer to be yes or no. And of course, the psychic acts as if the answer they receive is the one that they expected to receive. Since no one is ever going to be 100% accurate, the psychic needs ways of getting out of a wrong guess or explaining away a wrong guess. Most psychics will say something to suggest that they're not 100% accurate. If they use astrology, they might say, well, the stars incline but do not compel. If a client doesn't recognise a particular incident, the psychic might suggest that it's been forgotten or even that it will happen in the future. The psychic might suggest that the incident is symbolic. For example, if the client doesn't recognise an out-of-date calendar, well, perhaps it represents a transition from one period of life to another, or a birth might really represent the beginning of a project, the birth of a business, or the writing of a book, or the birth of a new you. Scars could be emotional scars, for example. If a psychic doesn't want to answer, they can often assert that something else is more important. For example, if the client wants to know whether they will get a particular job, the psychic might say, oh, well, the important thing is how you deal with whether you get the job or not. And of course, that could well be true, but the psychic has created an excuse as to why they're not going to predict whether the person's going to get this job because they don't know. This is another way to lead into subtle flattery because, of course, you could say, in this particular case, you could say, well, the important thing is how you deal with getting it or not getting it, and they can go on to talk about the client's well-balanced personality and how good they are at dealing with the inevitable blows. You might think that psychics avoid predictions, will say as little as possible, and they might avoid specific predictions like that, like will I get a job, but actually, because clients tend to forget inaccurate statements and remember accurate ones, and also because they tend to remember accurate ones as being more specific than they were, it's safer for psychics to make lots and lots and lots of statements rather than avoid making statements. Make heaps of statements, and if 5 of them are right, that's probably what they'll remember. And as I say, they'll often remember them as being more specific. For example, in a TV program, a psychic said, oh, why am I connecting to Bambi? And interviewed after the reading, the client said, well, it was weird that he knew that my father wouldn't shoot deer because of Bambi. But of course, that's not what he said. He said Bambi. That could have been that you had the book Bambi as a child, or you saw the Disney film as a child, or you had Disney wallpaper which included Bambi, or you had a pet deer, or you saw a deer once and asked your parents whether it was Bambi or anything else. Hot reading, although it's more rare than cold reading, is used, and of course in the age of the internet is quite easy. If a client books, you can search using their surname. You might find a recent obituary. People will often consult a psychic in relation to or as a result of the death of a loved one, and that's of course something that you can, or the psychic can, feed back to the client and give the impression that they've used supernatural powers. Sometimes, in the specific context of TV, the audience will be asked to give particular basic details like, my name is John and I'm looking to contact my dead father. During the show, the psychic might talk to that audience member and saying, so your name is John, isn't it? And you want to talk to Jack, who's your father, and he died recently. And of course, the audience member says yes. And it won't appear to the audience member, but it will appear to the people watching on TV that they've demonstrated psychic powers. So thanks for listening. That is an overview of the main techniques that psychics will use. In the next video in this series, I hope to give an overview of the techniques that faith healers use. So tune in for that.